Hello, LABCS scholars. Mr. Riley here. We are going to do part two of the Roaring 20s. This is more of the cultural stuff. We talked about a little bit of the political things. Now we're going to talk about the cultural stuff. All right, 1920s society. You can't put on here. 1920s society, blacks. So there was a lot of white resentment going on in this time period. Lynchings increased in the South. The Universal Negro Improvement Association was created by Marcus Garvey. It was to help create economic solidarity and advancement for Blacks, but it was a failed attempt of a mass migration to Africa. However, it did inspire Black pride and nationalism. Immigrants, the first Red Scare and nativism. First Red Scare was people being very afraid of communism. Nativism, which is a return of nativism, really, was that people wanted politically and culturally, a lot of people just wanted only those who were born in the United States to remain in the United States. So there, I mentioned the quota laws. So the Emergency Quota Act of 1921, it was 3%, only 3% of the 1910 census were for people to come here from other countries. National Origins Act of 1924, that made it so that only 2%. Okay. The Sacco and Vanzetti trial, 1920 to 27, they were two Italian immigrants that were executed for murder, despite the fact that there was no real evidence. It was just all circumstantial and made it easy to just blame immigrants for something that happened. Women in the 1920s society, the 19th Amendment and voting. So usually voted as husbands previously, but politicians catered to female-friendly legislation programs to get more women to vote. Employment, so women worked as clerical workers, like administrative people, teachers, nurses, and domestic servants. They had lower wages, and there were no managerial positions. Women were not allowed to be the boss of anybody. Margaret Sanger was the American Birth Control League, so that women could think about be able to make decisions for their own bodies and establish Planned Parenthood. The flapper girl, they were the young women of the jazz age. They would have short hair, short hemlines, so short skirts, wear makeup, cosmetics, and smoke cigarettes. 1920s prohibition. The 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act, supported by the middle class, progressives, and rural Protestants, especially in the South and West, completely ignored in urban centers. I mean, people just kept drinking anyway, even if they had to take it on the ground. There were bootleggers and rum runners smuggling alcohol. This was a huge time where organized crime was developed with people like Al Capone and the Italian mafia. There were these things called the speakeasies, where people would have like these underground saloons, basically in basements and even of houses, and sometimes of businesses. Like a restaurant would be on the main floor, but then they have the speakeasy in the basement. The Ku Klux Klan. So remember, we have talked about the Ku Klux Klan, and they had a resurgence in this time period in the 1920s, and things got very violent for anyone that the KKK put their eyes on. Religion, fundamentalism, literal view of the Bible, and creationism would attack the urban lifestyle and culture. There were revivalists of a more literal interpretation of the Bible. People like Billy Sunday and Amy Semple McPherson. There was modernism, which was a liberal view of religion. So sort of like, okay, we're not going to take everything perfectly literally. Acceptance of and coordination of science and context with faith. So You know, there's a place for science, there's a place for faith, and they don't have to be exclusive to each other. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can work together. Then in 1925 came the Scopes Monkey Trial, laws against teaching of evolution in the Tennessee public school. Creationism, William Jennings Bryan, and evolution, Clarence Darrow. So basically, these were debates over whether or not people should be, children should be taught that there is evolution or creationism, and it was a big fight. Hero worship. So this was a big time period. Like we have this now where athletes and movie stars and people like that are people that we worship. So athletes, celebrities, innovators were famous for individual accomplishment. And there's a picture there of Babe Ruth, who was quite possibly the greatest hitter in baseball history. He's the one who started all that major hitting. The personification of American individualism. So like an individual person could do whatever they dreamed of doing. And this, in all of it, with this whole, and there, oh yeah, I forgot about Charles Lindbergh, who crossed the Atlantic Ocean, the first person to cross the Atlantic Ocean in a plane. So, but this fueled tabloid and gossip columns and newspapers and magazines. So all that stuff we see now, you see it on Facebook and any other, and all this social media and on news outlets. That's where this started. It started in the 1920s. It's not a new phenomenon. Now the ability to get to it and see it nowadays, it's instantaneous. So that is new. The Jazz Age. The inspiration of rebellious youth and liberal recreation. Okay, let me start that over. Inspiration of rebellious youth and liberal reaction to conservatism and fundamentalism. So basically, it was sort of a rebellious way of dealing with all of these conservative values. The song and dance, like the jazz, Louis Armstrong, George Sherman, having the speakeasies. The speakeasies almost always had music and jazz part of it. There were dance clubs like the Waltz and the Foxtrot Waltz, to the Foxtrot to the Charleston. All these different dances were developed, and flappers. Radio started to become really popular. It was like the most mainstream medium. People actually just sat there and listened to their radios to find out what's going on, and they would actually even have news stations and programs on them. And NBC and CBS, those were the two big radio giants, and eventually they would get into television. Cinemas, they called these talkies because it was the first time that there was sound where people would speak on the screen. And the very first one was called The Jazz Singer. There were Nickelodeons, these little shorts, like little stories, and Charlie Chaplin, who's a picture there. Literature, the lost generation, disillusioned by World War I, consumerism and modernism. People like Ernest Hemingway would write about these issues that were cropping up. Two famous things that Hemingway wrote was The Sun Also Rises and A Farewell to Arms. Sinclair Lewis wrote The Babbitt, and F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. The Harlem Renaissance, now this is something that we're going to be talking about deeply tomorrow and Thursday, was fueled by the Great Migration and inspired by Black pride. Remember, the Great Migration, we talked about World War I, when Black people went from, or African Americans went from the South to the North in huge numbers for the first time. Themes that challenged racist stereotypes. Black was becoming beautiful. People were like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston were important, writing things like The New Negro and Interpretation in 1925. So it's basically breaking those stereotypes that had been instilled in American society for so long. So there we go. All right, so make sure you do your exit ticket, okay? and get back to and get it back to me. I will probably put it on a Google form actually, so you probably won't need to share it with me. But make sure you do it. And if you, like I said in the last video, if you want extra credit, you need to make sure you do all of your exit tickets, all of your activities, all of your assessments that you're given this week before I give you credit. And Miss Marks gives you credit for the extra credit. Okay, you can go ahead and do that extra credit, but I'm not counting it unless you've gotten all these other things done. Okay, that's it. Have a good rest of your day.